In football, there's a saying, games aren't won on paper. But what happens when you take the best players on earth, Ballon d'Or winners, Champions League legends and rising superstars and put them all into the same dressing room? Logic of course says they should dominate, fans expect a dynasty and the world watches waiting for greatness. And then they crash. Hard. Egos collide, managers get sacked and the system breaks. What was supposed to be football in perfection turns into a cautionary tale. This is the story of 5 stacked football teams that failed horribly. Right, let's get this one out the way early because as an Englishman, this one is still painful. Let's start this off by listing off some of these players. David Beckham, Steven Gerrard, Frank Lampard, Paul Scholes, Wayne Rooney, Rio Ferdinand, Ashley Cole and John Terry. World-class elite players playing at the very top of their game for the best clubs in their country. Without doubt, this team was the best side since the 1966 World Cup winning team. But now let's just remember that's on paper because on the pitch it was a different story. The media had hyped this England team up like no other. With no trophy for over 40 years, this was going to be the side to bring back the glory. But there were many problems beneath the surface. And first of all, there was just absolutely no chemistry between these players. In fact, it was even worse than that, there was complete animosity. The Premier League rivalries at the time were serious. It was aggressive, nasty and real. There was no hugging after games or chatting in tunnels like we see today. Now while that made the Premier League incredibly fun to watch, it was extremely detrimental to that England team. Now to just give you an example of this, when it came to basic things like team meals, the Liverpool, Man United and Chelsea players would all sit separately and refuse to actually bond at all with any of their rivals. Now look, do you really need to like everybody that you play with? Spain seemed to cope completely fine when half their team was at Madrid and the other half was at Barcelona. Did that stop them winning? No. But who knows, maybe there is some sort of psychological effect. When things are going bad, your back's up against the wall, are you really going to dig deep for players that you don't even really like? Now you may not like Southgate's tactics, but the complete opposite was true for his England sides. A group of players, all rivals in the Premier League, but when it came together in the England camp, they all clearly got on very well. And Southgate's teams were much more successful than the golden generation. But that wasn't the only problem, the tactics were also a mess. Sven-Göran Eriksson came into that England team considered a European genius, after being really successful winning multiple trophies in Italy. However, when it came to picking that England team, his 4-4-2 was outdated and unbalanced. Gerrard and Lampard in midfield, it sounds unstoppable, but in reality you've got 2 attacking players getting in each other's way. And then because of that, you've got Paul Scholes of all players pushed out to the left. Looking back now, it's obvious to anyone that a Carrick or Hargreaves was clearly needed in that team. If Sven had left out a star player to actually allow some balance, the media and fans, they probably would have gone mental. A brave decision was needed at the time and unfortunately Sven didn't make it. England crashed out the 2004 Euros on penalties to Portugal. And then it was deja vu in the 2006 World Cup as they were eliminated again by Portugal in the quarterfinals and again on penalties. A team of elite players who had no problem slotting away penalty after penalty for their clubs, but when it came to international football, maybe the moment got to them. Penalties, of course, is a bit of a lottery, but it was clear their mentality wasn't quite there. Anyway, this one is bringing back way too many bad memories, so let's go quickly on to the next one. Now, England were not the only nation to seriously underperform in that 2006 World Cup. And this one was possibly even more shocking. We're looking at potentially one of the most talented football teams the world has ever seen. And of course, we are talking about that 06 Brazil squad. Just look at this lineup. Ronaldo, Ronaldinho, Kaká, Roberto Carlos and Cafu. Just a ridiculous team. They came into the tournament as reigning champions, but crashed out like England in a quarter-final. So what's happened? Well, if you had to pick one thing about that squad, you could say the defence was an ageing one. It was a combined age of 69 between Roberto Carlos and Cafu, but they were still definitely considered world-class fullbacks at the time. Juan and Lucio also looked like a strong partnership, and it was the midfield that everyone actually considered unstoppable. Ronaldinho entered the tournament as the world's best player, winning the 2005 Ballon d'Or. And Kaká had just enjoyed his best goal-scoring season with Italian giants AC Milan. Brazil were definitely the favourites going into this tournament. But when Croatia gave him a tough game in their first opening match, despite winning 1-0, everyone could see this team was not invincible. They ended the group stage with 9 points, winning all 3 games, but not playing the great football we all expected. And when they met France in the quarter-finals, they were exposed. Brazil's football was lackluster and uninspired, while the French looked brilliant. And for the first time in the tournament, Brazil's manager had not started all the members of the so-called Fab Four. Instead, he preferred to play Leon's Juninho in place of Adriano. And that seemed to be a big mistake, but there's some things in football you can't control. And that was a Zinedine Zidane masterclass who made Brazil look stupid. It was a 1-0 loss for Brazil, and if you thought the reactions to England going out were bad, this was on another level. They were absolutely destroyed by media and the fans. They were described as playing with no honour and being a disaster. Globetrotters who played as individuals rather than a team. This was a rough season for Barcelona fans. It had all the potential to be a dominant year. You had Messi, of course, still elite with 25 goals and 21 assists that year in La Liga. Suarez aging, yes, but still seriously deadly. De Jong, one of the most promising young midfielders on the planet. Veterans like Piqué, Jordi Alba and Busquets with countless years of experience. And to top it all off came Atletico Madrid superstar Antoine Griezmann for 120 million euros. On paper, they were possibly the best lineup in Europe, but in reality, it was a trophyless season. Second place in La Liga, a quarter-final exit in the Copa del Rey, a semi-final exit in the Supercopa, and a horrific thrashing in the Champions League quarter-final too. We'll get to that in a minute. It was Valverde who was in charge until January, when he was sacked despite being at the top of the league. It was felt that Valverde was taking away from the club's identity that Pep Guardiola had built. The club's management felt a change was needed to rejuvenate the squad and improve their chances of success in the Champions League. It was then Quique Setién who came in at a difficult time for Barcelona, and his man management skills were awful. Fallouts of players were a common theme, and his tactics were often confusing to fans. And when they faced Bayern Munich in the quarter-final of the Champions League, it was the first time since 1946 that they conceded 8 goals, a humiliating defeat that marked the end of an era for Barcelona. Truly rock bottom. The club needed a complete restructure, and I don't necessarily mean the players or the coaches. The transfers were just strange ones. Griezmann was a world-class player, but he always looked best playing off a true number 9, and they already had Messi doing that exact role. So Griezmann was just an odd choice, and to be honest, a complete waste of money. A complete shambles. Okay, if we're going to pick on Barcelona, it seems only fair that we talk about Real Madrid too. During the 2003 to 05 era, Real Madrid assembled a superstar squad. Florentino Perez was announced as their new president in 2000, and a signing spree like no other had just begun. Figo, 60 million from their biggest rivals, Barcelona. Zidane, arguably the best player on the planet, 73.5 million from Juventus. Brazilian superstar Ronaldo, 45 million from Inter. England captain David Beckham, 37.5 million from Manchester United, and a promising young centre-back in Sergio Ramos for 27 million from Sevilla. Now add that to an already star-studded roster in Roberto Carlos, Iker Casillas and Raul, and you're looking at one of the most insane squads we've ever seen. It was complete domination from 2000 to 2003, 2 league titles and a Champions League. But it was only when Real Madrid started adding the more high-profile signings where the problems started to come. Europe became a nightmare. 2004 knocked out in the quarterfinals, and then in a round of 16 in 2005 and 2006. And to add to that pain, it was Barcelona who won the league title in 2005, followed by another in 2006 and a Champions League. So the question everyone I'm sure is thinking is how? How does a squad this elite fail? Well, Perez only focused on bringing in these attack-minded players. He was after superstars, the players who could bring in commercial success. And it truly did bring commercial success, that can't be argued. David Beckham on his own rose Madrid's marketing up to 30%, which made Madrid the world's richest club in terms of revenue. The defensive signings they did make flopped. Walter Samuel and Thomas Gravenson weren't up to it, and Jonathan Woodgate was the only one to really deliver, but his career was ruined by injuries. And then Vincent Del Bosque was sacked just before the 03-04 season in a pretty shocking decision. He had led Madrid to so much success, but Perez for some reason decided to change it up. One thing Del Bosque did so well was managing these players' egos, and after he left, the players failed to work together as a team. You had many of them fighting for the same position. You had Beckham and Figo fighting for that winger spot. Some of these transfers just didn't really make sense. And a former club director actually said they wanted to sign Ronaldinho. However, because of his ugly looks, they went for Beckham instead. Now, if that's true, it's just embarrassing. Ronaldinho went on to become the best player on the planet, winning the Ballon d'Or. He took Barcelona to domestic and European glory. I'm sure Madrid were quickly regretting that decision. It was a clear case of too many egos and an unbalanced team. Between 2018 and 2022, Belgium had their very own golden generation. For those 4 years, they were the #1 ranked country in the FIFA rankings. 4 straight years at the very top with absolutely nothing to show for it. You had Kevin De Bruyne, Manchester City's main man, Romelu Lukaku well on his way to becoming the country's top goal scorer, Courtois potentially the very best keeper in the world, and Eden Hazard who was ripping it up at Chelsea. At their primes, these players were amongst the very best in their positions. However, it just didn't seem to come together. Not on the pitch and especially not in the dressing room. Their best finish was 3rd place in the 2018 World Cup, but since then it's gone downhill. The 2020 Euros was a quarter-final exit, and the Qatar World Cup they failed to even make it out the group. Players had completely fallen out, and it was actually reported that 5 players had actually booked their own flights home just to get away from the squad. Apparently Courtois and Kevin De Bruyne absolutely hated each other. Allegedly, Courtois had stolen Kevin De Bruyne's girlfriend, which as you can imagine didn't exactly go down very well. And when your 2 top players don't even speak to each other, how can you really expect your team to perform? 2018 was clearly their chance. This was the time where all their players were at their very peak. But Roberto Martinez probably wasn't the right man for the job. Now obviously he had done a good job at Everton, but going from managing Everton to some of the very best players in the world seemed like a bit of a drastic jump. Now I don't think you can say that 3rd place was a failure, but maybe a more established manager could have got more out of those players and possibly they could have won the whole thing. Now that is all 5 for today, but there's one super team that I haven't mentioned. The ultimate PSG super team with Lionel Messi, Mbappe and Neymar was one of football's biggest failures. But I've done the video on this already and you can watch it by clicking now. If not, thank you for watching and I'll see you on the next one.